If this man had agreed with his captain on October 27, 1962, there's a good chance you wouldn't be here today. One Soviet officer, one word, no. That's all that stood between a tense Cold War standoff and a nuclear exchange that many historians believe could have escalated beyond anyone's control. Not just a battle, but a war that reshaped or ended the world as we know it. His name was Vasili Arkhipov. Almost nobody's heard of him, but inside the U.S. Naval War College and in the writings of historians who've spent decades studying the Cuban Missile Crisis, his name comes up again and again, described without exaggeration as the man who may have prevented World War III. No headline ever ran. To the entire world, October 27th, 1962, was just another tense day in a tense month. Here's exactly how close it came, and why, in the end, it came down to one man in a steel tube under the Atlantic. To help you understand how things got here, you have to understand the year that led up to it. By 1962, the US and the Soviet Union had spent over a decade stockpiling enough nuclear weapons to wipe out civilization several times over. Neither side trusted the other. Neither side even had a reliable way to talk to the other in a crisis. Then that spring, the Soviets did something that pushed the two superpowers closer to war than they'd ever been. They started secretly shipping nuclear missiles into Cuba, just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. American U-2 spy planes photographed the missile sites in October 1962, and suddenly Kennedy was staring down a choice with no good options. Airstrikes could trigger war outright. So could an invasion. He landed on a naval blockade instead, though the US called it a quarantine, since blockade is technically an act of war under international law. Either way, the plan was the same: ring Cuba with warships and stop any more Soviet weapons from getting through. For the next 13 days, the world watched two nuclear powers stare each other down, each one convinced the other might strike first. Schools ran duck-and-cover drills, families stocked bomb shelters. Even now, historians call it the closest we've ever come to full-scale nuclear war. Hidden in the Soviet fleet headed toward Cuba was a diesel-electric submarine called B-59, one of 4 Soviet submarines the U.S. Navy detected trying to slip past the blockade. What the Americans didn't know was what B-59 was carrying: a nuclear-tipped torpedo, roughly as powerful as the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. And understanding Soviet orders, if the submarine came under attack and couldn't reach Moscow to confirm whether war had already broken out, its officers were authorized to use it. By late October, American destroyers picked up B-59 on sonar. To force it to the surface, a standard non-lethal signal under international protocols, the U.S. Navy began dropping practice depth charges, small explosives meant to say, essentially, "We see you. Come up." Nobody informed the Soviet crew that this was the protocol. As far as they knew, they weren't being signaled. They were being attacked. And conditions inside B-59 made that far easier to believe. The submarine had been submerged for days, cut off from radio contact with Moscow. Designed for colder waters, it had no functioning air conditioning in the Caribbean heat. Temperatures inside reportedly climbed past 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Carbon dioxide levels were rising as the air scrubbers struggled to keep up. Men were fainting at their stations. And for all any of them knew, a war that would decide their fate, and the fate of everyone they loved back home, had already started somewhere over their heads, and they had no way of finding out. Then the depth charges hit. To every man in that submarine, it sounded exactly like combat. The captain, Valentin Savinsky, became convinced the war had already begun. Surfacing in his mind meant surrendering into the middle of an active attack, a death sentence either way. So he gave the order: prepare the nuclear torpedo for launch. Soviet protocol for this specific submarine class required agreement from 3 officers before a nuclear weapon could be fired: the captain, the political officer, and the second in command. Savinsky said yes. The political officer, Ivan Semenovich Maslenikov, said yes. 2 votes down. On most submarines in the fleet, that would have been enough. Some accounts of Soviet protocol at the time describe only 2 signatures being required. But B-59 wasn't like the other submarines in the flotilla that day. Because on board, by chance of assignment, was Vasili Arkhipov, the flotilla's second-in-command, holding a rank equal to the captain's. There almost by accident of deployment, rather than because he served on that specific vessel. His agreement wasn't a formality on this particular boat. It was required. He refused. Arkhipov argued that the pattern of explosions was too regular, too controlled to be an actual attack. That this looked like a signal, not an assault. He had no additional information that the other 2 men in that room didn't have. He wasn't privy to some secret channel confirming peace outside. He simply refused to accept, on incomplete information, the one assumption that could never be undone, that they were already at war. He pushed for the submarine to surface first, to find out the truth before doing something irreversible. This is the hinge point of the entire story. One man, holding no more evidence than anyone else in that steel room, but holding just enough rank in that exact moment to make his uncertainty outweigh 2 other men's certainty. The captain relented. B-59 surfaced. No war was waiting for them. Just American ships, signaling the submarine to leave the area. No torpedo was fired. Within days, back-channel negotiations between Kennedy and Khrushchev produced a resolution. The Soviets would remove their missiles from Cuba, and the US would quietly remove its own missiles from Turkey. And the 13 days that came closest to nuclear war in human history came to a quiet end.